10 WWE wrestlers you wouldn't believe had enormous backstage heat. Let's watch.
Backstage heat in pro wrestling relates to when a wrestler has upset certain people backstage. This usually stems from the wrestler rubbing people the wrong way or doing something wrong that is against the ethical code of a pro wrestling locker room. While some stories of backstage heat seem justified, there are some stories that are completely baffling and highlight how trivial and borderline insane the politics involved in pro wrestling can be. So with that being said, let's look at 10 wrestlers you wouldn't believe had backstage heat. Number 10, Chris Jericho. When Chris Jericho arrived in WWE in 1999, he somehow managed to rub most of the top talent the wrong way. Jericho was a major player for WWE, and WWE quite rightly saw dollar signs when it came to Y2J. Jericho's first instance of receiving backstage heat in the company was for the most ridiculous thing imaginable. During a promo segment between Jericho, The Undertaker, and Big Show, Jericho would refer to the Dead Man's promo as boring, and the WWE locker room felt this was disrespectful. Speaking about the incident on Kurt Angle's podcast, the inaugural Undisputed Champion stated, "My second promo I called Undertaker boring. I said, you're boring. And really, the worst thing is, he had just, we laugh about it to this day, he had just done this super long, ridiculously boring promo about taking Big Show to the desert to try and teach him how to be tough and feeding him scorpion meat and drinking water out of a puddle, and it just dragged on and on. I was supposed to cut him off and call him boring, but this night he really was boring. What was supposed to get heat, a lot of people were like, well, we can't argue with that, and I was simply too far dumb to realize it, and it ended up getting heat on me." Number 9, Seth Rollins. In modern WWE, Seth Rollins is considered to be one of the most respected stars in the entire company, but when Rollins made his main roster arrival in 2012, he obtained backstage heat rather quickly. The reason for Rollins' backstage heat was that after a match, he was seen using an ice pack, and this didn't sit well with WWE's top star, John Cena. It was then reported that Rollins and the other members of the Shield had a big target on their back, and the trio, but specifically Rollins, had to try and win over the locker room. The reality here is that a wrestler using an ice pack following a match isn't remotely a bad thing. What's the issue here? Why shouldn't wrestlers try to heal up after a match? This was a case of Cena stretching his backstage power to the detriment of others. Number 8, Tyler Breeze.
It's an ice pack, though. So you can't use an ice pack? What? That didn't even make sense.
Tyler Breeze was going to make his main roster debut in 2015. Fans were excited, as Breeze had been a top star in NXT, and fans were hoping that Breeze would be presented well on the main roster. Things started extremely well for Breeze, as he would defeat Dolph Ziggler at the Survivor Series pay-per-view, yet shortly after this huge pay-per-view victory, reports would surface stating that Breeze suddenly had backstage heat. It was reported that Breeze had gathered this heat due to him asking to leave early after a SmackDown taping. It was said that Breeze had received permission to leave early, but even still, this was seen as unprofessional. Breeze was moved dramatically down the card, and before fans knew it, Breeze's main roster push would officially be over. Number 7,
because he wanted to leave early?
During the Ruthless Aggression era, Matt Striker had attained astronomical heat backstage in WWE. The reason for this heat was a passing comment that Striker made relating to the Raw roster being better than the SmackDown roster. The SmackDown roster had names such as Chris Benoit and JBL attached to it at this time, so naturally, this didn't go down well. This was a case of Striker simply hyping up his own brand, but the other wrestlers didn't see it that way, and when Striker appeared in a dark match for SmackDown, the backstage heat came to the surface when he was unceremoniously booted out of the SmackDown locker room. Number 6, Molina and Michelle McCool. Imagine getting backstage heat for having a great match. Well, that was the case in 2009 when Molina and Michelle McCool blew the roof off the arena at the Night of Champions event. The match was outstanding, especially for a time in which women were barely featured and they weren't encouraged to steal the show. Unfortunately, the match was a little too good and it rubbed the locker room and WWE management the wrong way. McCool would talk about the infamous match on her website, and McCool confirmed the initial reports regarding the backstage.
So petty.
"We got in trouble for our match at Night of Champions. We got in trouble for our match being too good for girls. So I don't care how much trouble I get in if that's what I'm getting in trouble for. It started where I drop kicked her on her split entrance to the mat. crazy bump, which she was always game for. The crazier the better. We always worked well with each other, always wanted to come up with something different, some new way to come out of her moves, get into one of my moves, something you don't always see the girls do. Number 5.
So they got heat for doing their job,
It's
which
well
is to
documented
entertain
just how much backstage
the
heat The
audience.
Miz had early on in his
This
WWE
is
career.
weird.
The Miz upset virtually the entire SmackDown roster, so much so that he was kicked out of the locker room. Even when Miz was WWE champion in 2011, the backstage heat continued, and this was mainly out of jealousy of Miz main eventing WrestleMania 27 against John Cena. Former WWE agent Arn Anderson shed some light on Miz having backstage heat on his podcast, and this is what he had to say. There was a lot of talent at that WrestleMania that were pissed that Miz was in that spot. During that period, there was a lot of animosity around and a lot of people that were trying to get over and get in position. When Miz was wrestling Cena, I just know that there were a lot of guys that felt that they've been in that spot and should have been in that spot. If you didn't want to be in that spot, something's wrong with you. I remember there was some tension here or there. Number 4, Booker T. When Booker T arrived in WWE back in 2001, he brought with him his love for video games. Whilst in modern WWE, wrestlers playing video games backstage is the norm, back in 2001, it was unprecedented. According to Booker, as well as reports, Booker legitimately received backstage heat for playing video games, and shortly after Booker began to play games backstage, an outright ban was issued. Speaking about this on his podcast, the multi-time world champion revealed, "I got to WWE. I got my whole little portable system with me, right? So I brought it with me, and I'm in the locker room. I got it all set up for some Madden football. I'm thinking the boys over there are going to be kind of like they were in WCW. So I'm setting it up, I got my team all set up, and D'Lo Brown comes up and he goes, 'Man, you playing some Madden?' I go, 'Yeah, you want to play?' He goes, 'Yeah, man, I'll play around with you.' So we sit down and we commence the round, and I'm kicking his ass. The next thing you know, Michael Hayes walks by and he goes, 'You guys playing video games, huh?' And I go, 'Yeah, we're just playing some Madden.' And he goes, 'Okay.' And he walks off, and D'Lo looks at me, and you know, D'Lo's a light-skinned brother, but he turned white, and he goes, 'Man, I gotta go.' I was like, 'Man,
He already knew what it was. He finna go snitch. Work snitch. Work, just like any work environment, there's always that one work snitch. Bro, this shit sounds miserable.
what the hell just happened?' From that point on, a note went out, no more video games. No one can play video games. I'm like, these guys are crazy here, man. Number 3, Muhammad Hassan. The wrestling industry wasn't kind to Muhammad.
Why? Like, why you gotta be a bitch? I mean, why you gotta be a snitch? I really didn't mean to say that. Why you gotta be a snitch? Like, come on, like, relax. Like,
Hassan, and for the most part, he did nothing to warrant the treatment he received within WWE.
this is so
Hassan had backstage heat from the day he
petty.
arrived on the main roster, as he was reportedly prone to question things when it came to booking and the presentation of his character. It was also reported that Hassan asked Eddie Guerrero if he could stop using the camel clutch, as he was using it as his finishing move. It was believed that Hassan was urged to do this by several wrestlers, and it was met with a less than enthusiastic response from Guerrero. Every single thing that Hassan was doing was resulting in backstage heat, and it was evident that the locker room was having a laugh at Hassan's expense. It was even reported that one time, Hassan paid for everybody's drinks in a bar, and the roster poured the drinks on the floor as a protest and to show Hassan that he was truly disliked within the locker room. Number 2, Matt Riddle.
Yep.
In
There he is.
2022, it was reported that Matt
I knew he
Riddle
was
had
gonna be on here.
backstage heat due to a comment he made about Roman Reigns during an interview. In this interview, Riddle would jokingly comment that he could beat Reigns in a real fight, and whilst no doubt a weird comment to make, it was ultimately harmless, but the locker room didn't see it that way. Riddle would be in an uncomfortable position in the locker room, as he was reportedly rather disliked at the time. It didn't help that names such as Brock Lesnar, Goldberg, and even Seth Rollins already disliked him, and now there were even more names in the anti-Riddle section of the locker room. Number 1, Edge and Christian. Back in the Attitude Era, it was common practice for wrestlers to receive backstage heat for nonsensical things. This was the case when Edge and Christian received backstage heat in 2000, and the backstage heat was so bad that the talented duo had to visit the Notorious Wrestlers Court. The story goes that Edge and Christian had built up a genuine friendship with head writer for WWE, Brian Gewirtz. The trio had very similar personalities and had the same interests outside the crazy world of pro wrestling. Apparently, Hardcore Holly saw Edge and Christian gifting Gewirtz an action figure of The Flash, and Holly, as well as other wrestlers, believed that the duo were bribing WWE's head writer. Edge and Christian would end up in wrestler's court, and according to Bubba Ray Dudley, the duo managed to reduce the amount of backstage heat by playing into the accusations of politicking. According to Bubba, the duo brought along their own book titled How to Kiss Ass, Politic, and Influence People, and they even purchased the judge of wrestler's court, The Undertaker, a bottle of Jack Daniels.
Oh, wow. All I got from this is just that the environment, the backstage, the locker room environment just sounds very miserable. Now, it's cool for them to play video games. I'm still stuck on that. It's cool for them to play video games now, from what he just said, but the fact that he just ran off and snitched like that is just so childish. Like, really? Like, this whole video was petty. Some of these sounded like super petty, but let's go do for this reaction, y'all. Leave some comments down below. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see y'all in the next one. Don't be a work snitch. Toodle.